Story number 1. When I met my husband, I was young, naive, and too curious of a person for my own good. At the time, I was newly pregnant, and we were living in an apartment with my sister. One day, we were in conversation about the paranormal. As a child, I had many things happen to me that I couldn't explain. My husband was being super skeptical about every story I told, so me and my sister, being ignorant, suggested we go and buy a Ouija board and show him that spirits were real. I'd heard all these horror stories about the board, even from my own father, but I was that person that had to find out for myself. Oh, how naive and stupid I was. After we located a board, we first took it to the local park in order to try and separate it from our home. Of course, nothing was happening, and was just adding to our frustration, so we left for home. Upon arrival, my sister kept going on about trying it again, and of course I stupidly agreed. We took it to my bedroom to play despite my hesitation, and after a few minutes of no response, the planchette eventually moved to yes. After asking if any spirits were there, we were pretty excited that it was moving, and even tried to debunk if the other could have moved it. Right away, the planchette wouldn't answer questions, but kept moving in a figure of 8 kind of motion over and over. We eventually got tired of its lack of response and gave up. A few days later, my sister came to me upset and said that the night before her door was shaking violently. It was closed, and it was like someone was pushing the door back and forth. She seemed pretty freaked out. I just sat there and listened, in complete shock, but in my mind I wasn't perceiving it as being that big of a deal. A few nights later, my husband and I were laying in bed trying to sleep, and all of a sudden our bedroom door started to shake back and forth on its hinges. But it was definitely not as minor as I'd thought originally. The door was shaking rapidly and violently. I woke my husband and said, "Look at the door, look at the door." He just stared and said, "What the fuck?" We watched it shake for a few more minutes, till it eventually stopped. And then silence. A piercing silence. My husband got up and looked out in the hall, checked on my sister. No one was there, and she was fast asleep. We just kind of shook it off as nothing, and for months the door shaking happened to one of us almost every night. We started staying at my parents' house more often, just to avoid the freaky nights at home. One night, I was about 7 months pregnant at the time. I'd taken my husband's kids to school that morning. I was extremely tired, so when I returned home I decided to go back to bed for a little while. I was sleeping, and all of a sudden I awoke, feeling something crawling and walking on my feet to the bed. I sat up and looked. Nothing. Nothing was there. Could I have dreamed that, I thought. But no, I went back to sleep, until I was woken again. The same feeling of something crawling towards me on the bed. I sat up again. Nothing was there. I told myself it was a dream, and laid back down. I was trying to fall asleep. I felt it again. This time I wasn't asleep. It felt like when a cat would walk up the bed towards you. Very light but distinct little paws. We don't have cats or any animals due to severe allergies. I shot up in bed and looked around, but saw nothing. That time I was really freaked out, and realised I wasn't dreaming the first 2 times either. I got out of the apartment so fast, and refused to go back until my husband got home. It had really shaken me up, that situation. So much so we moved out the apartment about a month later. I do believe that something had attached itself to us that night after we'd used the board. We'd had a lot of freaky experiences still since using that board. Oh, that's another story. Story number 2. I'm now a 34-year-old mother, but this happened to me when I was in the middle of school, if I remember correctly. I've always had a spotty memory when it comes to this subject. Sometimes I wonder if it was just being paranoid or remembering incorrectly. But the fact that my stepsister was with me on one of the most memorable occasions says otherwise. I think it's human nature to try rationally explain these types of things. So, I bought a Ouija board. I believe it was at Spencer's store. I would use it with my stepsister and sometimes with some of my friends. We'd been using it for a while, but never really experienced or thought much of it. I guess we both felt a bit silly about the whole idea. Also, when we would invite my friend to use it with us, she would always brush it off or kind of make fun of us. So a lot of the time, the little window that was used would go right to either no or goodbye. Sometimes without us even asking. Well, one night, my stepsister and I were alone in the house and bored, so we decided to play with the Ouija board. This time I was serious about getting a response. The fact that it would say no and goodbye only had me very curious. I lit up a random candle I'd found. We went back into the dining room, which was right smack in the middle of the house, and we sat on the carpeted floor in the middle of the dining room. I started off by asking if anyone was there, and the classics really, and the planchette moved to yes. I still remember my stepsister looking at me like I was the one moving it. I then asked boy or girl, to which it responded boy. I don't recall the name it gave us, or what else we asked it. I only remember when things started getting very frightening. At this point we both knew this was for real, and that neither one of us was moving the planchette. I remember the planchette started moving rapidly. It kept circling around the same 3 letters. I-C-U. Over and over. My stepsister at this point wanted to stop and put it away. I, being the hard-headed one, insisted we continue. I asked, "Where are you?" To which it spelled out, "Behind you." We both turned to look behind us, and nothing was there. So I asked again, "Where are you?" And again it responds, "Behind you." That's when we both noticed my dad's puppet. It was one of the Mexican puppets, a male puppet with a white outfit and a hat. You know, with the strings across the top that you move it with. My dad always left it in that room, hung from the ceiling with a hook. When we finally noticed the little guy, he was sitting on one of the chairs directly facing us. We stare at it for what seemed like years, until my stepsister jumps hysterically, yelling at me to stop using it, put it away, and that we shouldn't be fucking around with this. She was in full-blown panic mode. The eyes on that puppet looked like they were staring at me, I'll admit that. By that point, I was getting spooked too, so I casually agreed with her and decided to put it away for the night. But not before I went and turned the puppet around and threw some pieces of clothing over. But not before I went and turned that damn puppet around and threw my jumper over it. If it was in fact looking at us through the thing, I didn't want it facing us. I went and put the board away in its designated drawer in our shared bathroom. I come back out, and my stepsister just standing in the middle of the dining room, just processing what happened. I think we were both a bit in shock, so we started discussing as to what the hell was going on. Maybe 10 minutes later, we heard a knock on our front door. By this time we'd both gone our separate ways into our bedrooms. Funny that we decided that was the safest place. We were still a bit spooked, but thought nothing of the knock. My stepsister was expecting her older brother back at some point. However, we both got up and went to the door. No one was there. We then hear a tapping at our window, and assumed he was trying to get our attention. He often did that, especially if he wanted in the house without his mother knowing what time he'd get in. Our window faced the front yard, so it was almost next to our front door, and she called out to him. To no response. Then we heard a knocking at our back door. Again, at this point, we were still set on it being her brother, who we kept missing because maybe he was too impatient to wait at the front door and decided to get our attention in other ways, such as the knocking on the window. So this time, I'm the one heading for the back door to open it. When I do, there's no one there. I yell for him with no answer. I do that thing stupid girls in horror movies do, stepped outside and peered down the little sidewalk that connects the front yard to the backyard, still thinking we are somehow just missing him. Now that is when it snaps in the back of my head. Maybe it's not her brother. I darted inside and slammed the door behind me. My stepsister was standing in the dining room, expecting to see her brother. I think I was visibly shaken up as I just see her face drop, and she too realizes it's not her brother. As soon as we both lock eyes and we comprehend this, there's another knock on the front door. My goodness, I think we both jumped out of our skins and bolted to our bedrooms. We have separate beds and both dived into one and pulled the covers over our heads. We were freaking out. She's near tears, and I'm just trying to rationalize it in any way. I think it's easier to explain something away than deal with the truth, because the truth is scary as fuck. I don't remember what happened after that, but for the rest of the night, in all honesty, it's like my memory was wiped clean. Even now, after all these years, it always makes the hairs on my arms stand on end when I think of it. Only one thing remains with me of that night. I never told my stepsister, but I never forgot. And I always wonder if it had any meaning, or if I was the one it was after. That night, I dreamt of a demon making love to me. It was a big, black, smoky figure, broad in the chest and back, with a small, thin lower body. I remember it had two huge black horns on its forehead. I don't remember it having eyes, just the outline of a face. In my dream, it was as if I was standing at the foot of my bed watching myself with it. I recall the sex was good. I was enjoying myself a lot. It was on top and I was wrapped around in it tightly. I remember clearly seeing my stepsister asleep on her bed. My room was exact in every detail. After that night, we've agreed we'll never touch a Ouija board again.